Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Life of Gaia channel. I have been watching the news lately, and it just so happened that 2 nights ago there was a program on CNN about mushrooms and microdosing. And so I wanted to hop on and create this interview around microdosing, particularly on mushrooms, because it seems to be becoming very much more mainstream at the moment. And there seems to be more and more research leading to or pointing to, the benefits of it in so many different scenarios, such as PTSD or alleviating the anxiety around the news of terminal illnesses and things like that with, Johns Hopkins University and Professor Roland Griffiths leading the way in all of this. So it was super last minute, and I asked a very, very dear friend of mine, Elaine Reynoso, who is here with us today. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you, Gaia. Happy to be here.
Now, Elaine's background a little bit is in corporate financing. She comes from the corporate world. A series of different medical issues that affected some of her family members. She started doing a lot of research, and Elaine is amazing at research. And she started looking into sort of more holistic approaches on how to handle healing and improve peace of mind and just overall brain function. So Elaine is a practitioner and a facilitator of some of these medicines and modalities. And I thought it would be great to have her here to answer a whole lot of questions that we may have around microdosing. So Elaine, over to you. I'd love you to introduce yourself quickly, and then we'll get started with the questions.
Thank you, Gaia. As Gaia said, I have background in corporate finance, and I left all that. It's been a little over 10 years. Kind of started freelancing on my own in various fields and ended up doing, as Gaia said, a ton of research in holistic and natural approaches. Along the way, I discovered psychedelics. Well, let's start with meditation and yoga. Those were my gateway drugs into the psychedelic realm, and just kind of seeing the benefits. The concept that we've all heard recently is biohacking and how it can help our brain and our immune system. So there's a lot of benefits to mushrooms, which we'll talk about now.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and a very warm welcome again. It's such a pleasure to have you here. So let's start off with a very basic question. For those who don't know or aren't familiar with it yet, what is microdosing?
Microdosing refers to the practice of taking just a minuscule amount of a particular substance, mostly psychedelics like LSD or psilocybin mushrooms. And these can, well, we can talk about the benefits in just a second, but essentially that's what microdosing is.
And Elaine, you mentioned some of the substances that are commonly used for microdosing. Could you talk a little bit about those substances and which are the more popular ones?
Right, so the most popular would be LSD and, of course, psilocybin mushrooms, which we'll talk about. And then some other people tend to use mescaline or 2CB. Those are lesser used, as well as sometimes ketamine. But in particular, LSD is used a lot in the Silicon Valley, especially with some of the tech scientists. And I'm sure they do a lot of mushroom as well.
Elaine, could you explain to us sort of step by step and in very basic terms, if possible, how does microdosing actually work?
Well, when we're taking just a small amount, it's going to just affect us in a very subtle way, interacting with our brain's serotonin receptors, leading to subtle changes in our neural activity. These changes can enhance our focus, our creativity, and our mood as well.
Got it. Interesting. And that leads us into what are some of the potential benefits of microdosing? Like, why would someone start microdosing, and what do you think they could get out of it?
Well, that's a great question. Well, for one, as I mentioned, it will increase creativity, improve your mood, enhance your focus, your productivity. It can also heighten your spiritual awareness, reduce anxiety, depression. So these are some of the things that people will notice as benefits. And I mean, I don't know who doesn't want that. More creativity, better mood regulation. It brings us a lot of self-awareness. So we're able to handle things in a much better way than we normally would.
And Elaine, what comes up a lot for me in conversations with people, especially people who have never tried microdosing before, there seems to be a lot of fear around, the idea that if they take this, they might end up being on a trip or hallucinating or having some kind of adverse effect, or it being an uncomfortable experiences, and they seem to associate it with all sorts of different things. And risks predominantly. Are there any potential risks or side effects associated with microdosing?
Well, it's generally considered safe, but of course, we should always take a look at our own body and our own ailments, if you will. When you're microdosing, it's super mild. So we'll talk about dosage a little bit later. You're never going to take, if you're microdosing, enough of an amount to hallucinate. That should not happen. But we'll talk about dosing in a second. It can also, sometimes it can stimulate your heart rate, and it will heighten your perception, your vision sometimes. Maybe heart rate might alarm people a little bit sometimes. And sometimes you could also get a headache afterwards. Depends. So you should always stay hydrated. But I would generally say that for most people, it's safe. Obviously, you should consult your doctor when taking anything new, but if you're nursing or pregnant, don't do this. If you have any type of diagnosed psychiatric issues, such as psychosis or schizophrenia, definitely consult a doctor, and I would probably avoid using this. If you are on any type of antipsychotic or antidepressant, definitely consult your doctor. People have used microdosing psilocybin to get off of those, but with their doctor's help, because if you take too much of anything that affects your serotonin, there could be some issues. But generally, if you're a healthy individual, it should be fine.
So basically, it should be something that you almost don't even feel, really, right?
Right. Well, typically you'll notice it after the fact. You'll notice, oh, I didn't have any brain chatter, or wow, I was super productive and now I've slowed down a bit. So you won't really notice it.
Interesting. Yeah. So now we get onto the question of protocols in general. And the question is, how often should a person microdose? What do you recommend?
So if you're just starting out, I'd say, do 1 day on, maybe 3 days off, and then try again. You want to find the right sort of frequency and dosage for you. So it's going to vary from person to person. And some people will do, once you get a little bit more into it, you might do 3 days on and 3 days off. So you definitely want to have a break in between so that your body doesn't develop a resistance to it.
Talk a little bit about resistance. How does that happen with microdosing?
Well, with anything, if you take too much of it or take it too often, you might just need more in order to feel the same effects. So rather than having to take more of anything, you stop doing it for a few days or a day at least, and then you'll get right back up again. Kind of like even drinking alcohol. I mean, if you drink too much and then all of a sudden you stop for a month, next thing you know, one drink and you're gone.
And Elaine, one other question. Do particular, I know that different strains of different mushrooms and of psilocybin seem to have different effects. Do you know anything about that, or could you speak into that?
Absolutely. So yes, there are a million different strains of mushrooms, and they are different strengths, and they have different properties to them. One that people tend to use a lot will be penis envy or albino penis envy, and they're the strongest. And I also happen to feel that they're quite stern teachers, and they can stir up a little bit of anxiety and fear. So I tend to stay away from those. I prefer the sort of less strong, we're not going to call them weak, but less strong, like Golden Teacher, which has a bit more of a sort of spiritual, I don't know how to say it, it just your brain goes in a different direction, in a more positive direction rather than the other. And it's always better to start with something that is less strong and then work your way up anyway. This way you can kind of gauge how your body will react or how it affects you.
Let's talk dosages. You mentioned dosages earlier. What do you recommend as far as dosage for microdosing, particularly to people trying it for the first time?
So for people trying it for the first time, I'd say you want to stay about 100 milligrams, which is 0.1 of a gram, to about, a quarter or 0.3 of a gram. That's on the higher side. So I would definitely start with 0.1 of a gram, and, do that for a day, see how you feel, take a day off, try it again. If you feel like you need something a little bit more, then maybe you could up it to, 0.25 or 0.2, something like that. But I wouldn't take more than, 0.3 is where the line is for microdosing.
So how, if I were to try something like this, how would I prepare and measure a microdose?
You're going to want to get a gram scale, or microgram scale for sure. You can get yourself some capsules and maybe measure them and put them in capsules, or measure them and put them in little tiny cups with lids or something. You want to try to prepare ahead of time, maybe make a few doses so you have them when you're ready to use them. That's really what I'd say. Make a batch of them in advance for consistency and for convenience.
And how long would one batch last for? Is it something that goes off or expires, or?
So generally, I would say keep them in the fridge in an airtight container. You don't really want to leave them out because as they oxidize, they will lose some of their potency. I'd say the best is just to keep it in the fridge. I wouldn't even try to estimate on how long you should leave them out. Now, I'd say maybe a year where they lose their potency, but I'm not exactly sure on that.
And Elaine, what is the ideal duration of a microdosing regimen? I mean, when should someone start it? How long should they do it for? When should it taper off or end?
So I'd say that kind of depends on the individual and their goals. Some people might do a few weeks or months, while others really try to incorporate it into their life long term. Like I said, you should definitely just go a couple days on, a couple days off. When you're starting in the beginning, one day on, a few days off, and just see how that works for you.
Once you've started, how long does it take to actually experience the effects of microdosing?
Well, that's going to be based on the individual and how sort of aware they are of their body and how they feel. And also things like, did you just eat a meal, a large meal? Your body's digestion can also kind of play into feeling it. But generally, I'd say within, it could be anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes where you might start to feel it. And again, it might be so subtle that you might not even notice until it stops, until it's done. I'd say patience and self-awareness are key in this case.
Elaine, how do you feel about microdosing and mental health conditions?
I'm a huge proponent of using it for people's mental health. Again, we're talking about generally healthy people, and it's showing a lot of promise in research from back in the day and currently now, as you mentioned, Johns Hopkins University earlier. It really is great for alleviating symptoms of anxiety, depression, PTSD. However, it's really important to emphasize that this should never replace professional mental health treatment. Okay, so you should always consult your doctor, your psychiatrist, or someone who knows. And generally, what I'd say about anxiety, depression, and PTSD is it's not necessarily going to take our anxiety. It's not necessarily going to take these negative thoughts away. Okay, it's gonna sort of mellow you out, relax you. The anxiety might disappear. You're still going to have the thoughts, but how you process those thoughts is going to be different. So it's just you're going to have much more awareness of things.
The big question for you, is microdosing legal?
Well, that depends on where you live. So There are some cities and even states that have legalized it, decriminalized it. I think there might, I think I forget, is it Colorado where it's legal for medical treatment? So it really depends. You want to, check what the laws are in your own state. Scientific research right now is in the early stages, and while it might soon be legalized nationwide, it's not yet. So definitely check your jurisdiction and where you live.
Another question that comes up, we've had other interviews before, around sacred geometry, the use of psychedelics with creativity. And I would love to hear your opinion on, microdosing and microdosing being used to enhance creativity and cognitive function.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, they've been using it in the Silicon Valley for quite a long time to it in terms of creativity, and it'll enhance your problem solving abilities, your focus. It really does help you think outside the box because you have this different awareness, and your brain is it's thinking differently, it's seeing the world differently. So it definitely allows you to sort of step back and just be more creative and see things differently, problem solve, things like that.
Yeah, I believe Steve Jobs was also a big proponent and user of LSD and psychedelics in general.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, Elaine, can microdosing be combined with other medications?
I do not advise that. Again, you want to consult your doctor, but you should not be mixing any type of substances together. For certain, don't mix alcohol with anything psychedelic, in as well as any type of medications that interact with serotonin receptors. So that's why you definitely want to consult your healthcare professional and just make sure that it's okay to combine whatever you are on with microdosing.
Thank you. And what are some of the common protocols with microdosing? I know we've spoken about the one with psilocybin. Could you tell us about some of the others?
Yeah, so we have some of the founding fathers of psychedelics, like Stamets and Fadiman. So, like, for example, the Fadiman protocol of microdosing is every 3 days. In Stamets protocol, you're microdosing 5 consecutive days, followed by 2 days off. And, if you go online, I'm sure you can find some other protocols, but these are the general sort of advised protocols that are most popular these days.
Elaine, is microdosing suitable for everyone?
No, because we want to check your personal history, your mental health, and any medical conditions that you have. As we said before, if you're generally healthy mentally and everything else, perfectly fine. But if you are on other prescribed medicines, especially anything for psychosis, I would even say anything, like I said, antidepressants, antipsychosis, you definitely want to consult your doctor. If you have a history of any of that, I would not advise taking any of this. So definitely seek your professional advice from your doctor.
Do you have any guidelines or resources that people could access that you know of that are available for safe microdosing protocols and practices?
Believe it or not, I did a Google search actually a little earlier, and there is tons and tons and tons of information out there. While actual sort of professional research is still kind of limited, it is, as we talked about, there's a lot more research coming out every day. And I would say you definitely want to look into MAPS. Let me see, Multi-Interdisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. There is a wonderful book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. I believe they made a Netflix series out of it as well. I would definitely check that out. And also, I mean, just be really careful what you find online because you just never know where it's coming from. So try to make sure that the source of the information is reliable. What else? There are a lot of studies out there that explore the potential benefits for mental health, creativity, cognitive function. But they're still doing research on the topic. So
yeah, and speaking of research, I mean, I'm fascinated by the research around psychedelics in general, and I love the work that they're doing at Johns Hopkins University. And I recently listened to an interview with Professor Roland Griffiths, who has been studying the effects of psilocybin on alleviating the anxiety around death, that people who've been given the information that they have a terminal illness, and it's proved to be extremely successful. And there's a very large percentage of people in these studies who actually report psilocybin as being one of the most significant events of their lives, like the actual experience of it and what they connect to. And I was curious, I'd love to hear your thoughts, or any scientific studies that you know about or research around, in support of microdosing.
yeah, well, what I can say is that I've used it even in my family. My mother has cancer, and while we've experimented with some microdosing, we've also done some macro ceremonies, if we will, and it definitely helped at ease her anxieties and fears about everything that she was going through. She had some really, really beautiful experiences that brought a lot of peace to her and sort of increased her faith. She's very faith in terms of religion and stuff like that, and it just sort of helped her connect to something beyond what she is seeing here in this world. And that provided a significant amount of peace. As you mentioned, Johns Hopkins University, there's tons and tons of studies. I think Johns Hopkins actually is the one that is doing the research on terminally ill cancer patients, stage 4 cancer patients. And there's a ton of information coming out of them right now. If you can find them online, I'm sure, Instagram. I know Maps. I do follow Maps on Instagram, and they're constantly posting about Johns Hopkins and their research. So it's definitely out there.
Yeah, amazing. And Elaine, I know that you are a power researcher, and it's something you take very seriously, which I'm thrilled about. Do you have any recommended books, videos, reading material to, the people who are starting out, or people that are a little bit more advanced and have tried microdosing before? Do you have any books that you could recommend that were, instrumental or helpful to you?
Well, Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind was, being able to see the history of psychedelics and the research that came in the 60s and 70s, and then the research that's happening now, that is all in that book. And for those people who don't love reading, the Netflix series How to Change Your Mind is probably the best thing you can watch right now. I would also say, think about this. There's a movie called, is it called DMT, The Spirit Molecule? I believe it's available on YouTube. That was probably the first movie I watched that introduced all of these topics to me.
Fantastic Fungi.
Yes, Fantastic Fungi. I believe there's a series on that, right?
Elaine, to bring this interview to a close, what is your message to the world around microdosing and wellness and mental health wellness?
My message to the world, well, I hope that everyone does their own research and comes to the conclusion of how it might help them. I think it would be absolutely, it might change the world if everyone started microdosing and doing psychedelic ceremony, in terms of bringing all of us greater peace, greater, peace of mind, greater understanding of the world and how we connect with others. And we get to see as well that we're not the only ones, individual, having fear and anxiety. It's the whole world is. So it can definitely bring everyone together. Just be sure to do your research and consult your medical professional before you start. But yeah, I think it's a great thing.
Elaine, that's such a great message. Thank you. And actually, I want to acknowledge you for your contribution to the world and your help in changing the world. And, you know, I so appreciate the research that you do, the information that you provide, the willingness that you have to constantly provide information in service of other people, and just in general, the stand that you are for your family, in particular, your mom. I know how, you know, I've sort of seen how you've been through the treatments with her and the help that you've provided her and to the rest of your family and to everyone who surrounds you. So I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me last minute on this interview, for providing so much information and being the amazing light that you are. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gaia. Oh, I so really appreciate that.
So for those of you who have watched today, thank you so much. If you would like to get in contact with Elaine, please feel free to put comments and questions below in the comment section. We'll be putting all the different links to the protocols that Elaine mentioned, the various guidelines, the movies, the books, all in the description section below. If you've enjoyed the content, please feel free to subscribe, share, comment. We really appreciate it, and it's super helpful. Elaine, thank you again.
Thank you, Gaia.